Hi there, and welcome to a special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos, coming to you this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are, from Calgary. I'm here for the Leadership Convention, the Conservative Party's annual convention, where Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the party, will face a vote tomorrow night. It's another story coming out of this province today, though, dominating headlines. Separatist sentiment was a key focus for a meeting that took place in Ottawa between the premiers and the Prime Minister.
I'm not going to demonize or marginalize a million of my fellow citizens when they've got legitimate grievances.
In my opinion, that is treasonous activity.
We're there on a fact-finding basis. If there's nothing treasonous about it.
New reporting alleges that one of the groups leading the separatist movement here in Alberta has met with Trump-associated officials looking to secure funding. We're going to talk to the former Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, about that live in moments. Then we're going to speak with Colorado's Governor, Jared Polis, about the overall state of relations between Canada and the United States. Plus, we've got a special edition of The Front Bench here to talk about both of those subjects and look ahead to tomorrow night's big leadership vote. Monty Solberg, Christy Clark, Tom Mulcair, and Stephanie Levitz will all be with me a little bit later on in the program. First, though,
I've always been clear that me and our United Conservative Caucus are supportive of a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. When you look at the polls, they suggest as many as 30% of Albertans have lost hope. That's about 1 million people. And I'm not going to demonize or marginalize a million of my fellow citizens when they've got legitimate grievances. What we need to do is we need to give Albertans hope.
Expect the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. I'm always clear in my conversation with President Trump to that effect, and then move on to what we can do together.
I described it as an old-fashioned word because we haven't had to use it for a long time. In my opinion, that is treasonous activity, and it needs to be called out. It needs to be stopped.
some of the reaction there around the table between the premiers. You heard the Premier of BC and Alberta there, as well as the Prime Minister, to that reporting initially from the Financial Times, which alleged that this group, the Alberta Prosperity Group, its leader and some of its delegates had traveled to the United States and met with people associated with the White House in order to secure some level of funding. That was the reaction in Ottawa. CTV News here in Calgary spoke to the leader of that group, Jeffrey Rath, to get his reaction. Have a listen.
Childish, ridiculous, silly, unbecoming a premier of a province. It's just dumb. But I mean, we're happy that he does it. I mean, honest to God, he's going to get another 100,000 Albertans to go sign our petition. So, and it's, again, we all know who David Eby is. He jumps he's like Doug Ford, you must respect my authority. I have a veto over your pipeline. You will not have a pipeline. We all think he's a joke, right? I mean, it's, he is what he is.
If there's one thing I'm getting from you, you see it as positive publicity for the separatist movement.
Well, every time these idiots open their mouths, the backlash in Alberta, is through the ceiling. Eby can't even come up with an original insult, right? Jason Kenney made front page news, 6 or 7 months ago by calling me a treasonous kook, right? And the result of that was literally tens of thousands of comments directed against Mr. Kenney, telling them that we fired him once, we don't need to hear from him. And it made it absolutely clear that a non-politician like me has more political support in Alberta than a former premier of Alberta, because people are sick and tired of federalists coming here and telling us what to do. People are tired of Jason Kenney. They're tired of David Eby. They're tired of Carney.
That's the leader of the Alberta Prosperity Group. I want to bring in now former Premier of Alberta and former federal Conservative Cabinet Minister Jason Kenney, who joins us live. Mr. Kenney, good to see you as always. Thank you for making the time.
Good to be here, Vashi.
So I want to start off on the point that Mr. Rath made there, which is essentially the allegation that anytime someone who is kind of pro-national unity speaks out about it, it ends up serving his cause. What is your reaction to that?
I don't really listen to anything this guy says. He's a clown and a carny barker and thrives on conflict, and he just randomly insults people. But there are, as Premier Smith has said, many Albertans with very deep and legitimate and longstanding grievances about how the Federation has treated our province, and more particularly our resource industries. And Ottawa needs to demonstrate it's sensitive to those concerns. So I think what Albertans are looking for in this debate is not a trading mat, kind of an insult competition, but rather real issues. And I think that the MOU signed by the Prime Minister is a significant step forward. And he just said this week he's committed to a West Coast pipeline. And Premier Eby said he admitted what I think is the obvious, which is that he can do nothing to stop it. So I think we are making progress. I think we Albertans should take yes for an answer. We've got a pipeline to the West Coast in the Trans Mountain expansion owned by the federal government, creating billions of dollars of value. We've got huge expansion coming with LNG. We've got a federal government finally committed to another West Coast pipeline. We're producing and selling more oil than we ever had in our history. And the idea that turning into a landlocked statelet with no argument, no legal power, to build coastal pipelines or expand our infrastructure, our export infrastructure, would be, I think, economically suicidal. So I think the separatists, what they want to do is play on anger as opposed to actually deal with those very real facts.
I wanted to ask you, because there is like large public opinion polling firms, for example, who are trying to assess how significant the sentiment is, and particularly not just the sentiment of feeling sort of overlooked as you describe it, but feeling as though the best course of action out of that would be to separate. And they keep indicating that it's a minority. The people involved in that movement think that it's a lot more, and certainly say that to a number of my colleagues based on the turnout that they're seeing at some of their events.
Sure.
As someone who led the province for a number of years, a gut feeling as sizable the movement is?
The movement itself, well, let's look. Alberta separatism really started as a movement about 50 years ago, around the time of Pierre Trudeau's National Energy Program. And there have been separatist parties on the ballot of almost every federal or provincial election in this province since then. So by my count, about 24 federal or provincial elections since 1980, during which they have won one seat for 6 months in a provincial by-election at the height of the NEP, which they promptly lost. Typically, when separatist parties go on the ballot in this province, they get, in a handful of rural ridings, they might get 5%, province-wide 1%, 2%. So that shows you what the activist core of this is. However, I think a lot of Albertans are looking at using this prospective referendum as a lever to express their broader frustration. And, the argument you hear from those people, I call them frustrated federalists. They're people who proudly sing "O Canada" at hockey games. They have kids who have been in the RCMP or the military. Maybe some of them moved here from other provinces, but they think the province has gotten a raw deal. And they say, hey, Quebec has managed to get special consideration in the Federation with the knife to the throat strategy. So I think that is a challenge for federalists, which is to say that there will be a better deal for the province and its economic future with a government. And so there has to be a yes to Alberta. When Preston Manning started the Reform Party, remember his slogan was "The West wants in." We didn't hear these kind of rumblings when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, and there was a government that broadly understood and respected the concerns of the West and Alberta. And so I just think it's important for Ottawa to demonstrate that, not just in words, but also in actions, so we can demonstrate to those frustrated federalists that there's nothing good that can come from this. It will just create, the debate itself will create massive investor uncertainty. In Quebec, the election of the PQ in 76 led to a flight of people, of capital, depreciation in real estate values, business bankruptcies. We don't want any of that. We don't need any of that.
Are you worried about the prospect of a referendum? And I ask, I know the analogy is far from perfect, but I keep, being reminded of Brexit and the initial thought that let's do it because there's no way this thing could actually go forward, or in this case, maybe there's no way it's going to be, as you and others have pointed out, an overwhelming majority. But are you worried about something like that actually taking place and the risk inherent to it?
I think the chances of a majority of Albertans voting to become a landlocked mini state lose its free trade access around the world, have to, get visas and work permits to go to the rest of Canada, not be able to build any pipelines because we don't have any a government, any constitutional authority from the federal government to ensure one. I think all of that, when people that, by the way, take what have become very constructive relations with Indigenous people, with First Nations in Alberta, between industry and First Nations, and turn that on its head, have civil disobedience, railway and highway blockades, as opposed to cooperation with First Nations on economic growth and development. When they actually look at that, I think you're going to see some of the bravado, which is being expressed, turn into a kind of a greater sense of prudence. Like, yes, we demand respect. We got a provincial government that I think is fighting for that. We've got a federal government that is responding on a number of issues. And so I think we can avoid that kind of a scenario. But, Vashi, as you're saying, in politics, you never know 100%. And I guarantee you that the people, the hardcore separatists, they are going to, they will crawl over broken glass. They're not just angry with Ottawa, they are angry with everything. And this could be one way for them to express it. There could be a lot of, I will say, mainstream, particularly urban, suburban Albertans, who don't bother showing up. And then you could have an intensity challenge. So it should not be taken for granted.
Just very quickly, I have a few seconds left, but I did want to ask you about the possibility of the Trump connection. I know that the group is denying that it's exactly as it's being reported, but they are not denying that they've made trips and had conversations. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, look, the real problem here is if the Trump administration has been willing to meet with Canadian separatists in secret, which is clear intervention in our domestic politics. We get quite rightly exercised when we see this happening, this kind of interference in our domestic politics from the People's Republic of China. We should be equally concerned when we see it coming from the United States. The comments of Secretary Bessent demonstrate mischief is at play here. And I would not be, given the way that Donald Trump conducts himself, the least bit surprised if he weighs in heavily on this prospective referendum. I think the government of Canada should be sending very clear signals that would be a bridge too far to step into an effort to tear apart our country. We could not tolerate that. There would have to be sanctions and an effort to create an alliance like Denmark did very effectively against Trump's threats to invade and annex Greenland.
I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Kenney, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Vashi.
Thank you. Former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. We're going to talk about all of this with our front bench a little bit later on in the program. Christy Clark, Monty Solberg, Tom Mulcair, and Stephanie Levitz will all be here. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. We've got a whole lot more of this special edition of Power Play on the other end of that break. Hi there, and welcome back to a special edition of Power Play. I'm coming to you today from downtown Calgary, very close to downtown Calgary, inside where the Conservative annual convention is about to get underway. Tomorrow night is the big night. We're going to hear from the leader of the party, Pierre Poilievre, and he will himself face a leadership vote, the first one since, of course, the general election a number of months ago. Here to talk a little bit more about how that may all unfold, I'm joined by Conservative Member of Parliament, Shivaloy Majumdar. Hi, Mr. Majumdar. Good to have you here. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for having me back. Good to see you.
What is the pitch that the leader of your party is making to members here? We almost won, and maybe next time we will.
Ours is a message of unity and hope, as it has been in the last campaign. This is an opportunity to show the difference between rhetoric and actual results. This is a country in which major decisions need to be made. That was a major ballot box question in the last time. And our message is that we'll get the job done. We'll deliver the hope, the purpose, the kind of things that Canadians expect from coast to coast. We'll deliver the jobs that they expect, the industry. We'll stop waging war and moving the goalposts with different bureaucracies on different little projects, but actually make the decisions to allow Canada to succeed in the disruptive time that we're all in.
Do you think your party has reckoned with why that message failed to resonate with enough Canadians to actually secure a victory? Like, and I ask against the backdrop of, like, clearly part of the message is going to have to be the next time that's not going to be the case. So do you think you have reckoned with whatever fell short in that message that you just delivered?
This was a narrowly contested election. Let's be very clear. This is a very narrowly contested election with a narrow outcome, even if the Prime Minister acts like he's got a big mandate that he's trying to steal through his different adventures. We're talking about a country in which over 8 million people who typically would not have connected with politics or their democracy, whether they're young people, whether they're workers, whether they're newcomers. The coalition that Pierre Poilievre has built is a coalition of people in this country that represents the generational decisions we need to make for the next half century. That message is something that I think we're very proud of and will continue litigating at every turn, like we have in the fall, and we will continue to into this year.
And I wouldn't take away from the point, right? Like, it's 400,000 plus people who essentially decided the election. But I think it's not also fair to say that that's the whole picture. Like, again, it's sort of a message of, well, we almost won, so we should just stay on the same track. That neglects to take into account the fact that 2 people have crossed the floor to the Liberals since, that you were a few months before that election 27 points ahead in the polls, that the leader of the party who will face that vote tomorrow night could not even secure a riding he had held for 2 decades. Are you reckoning with anything, or is it just status quo?
We've had almost a year of Mark Carney's government to see him make the big decisions that Pierre Poilievre has proposed all along. You'll recall that during the campaign that Mark Carney took from the Conservatives' script as much as he could, and that's great. We delivered a consensus. Pierre Poilievre won the debate. Now it's time to deliver the decisions that all of those things require for Canada, whether it's on taxes, on immigration, on getting our resources to market. It's been almost a year, and we still haven't seen any of that. Instead, we see gaslighting from Mark Carney's ministers on issues that we've been proactive on, whether it's bail reform, getting our resources to market with our Sovereignty Act and the motion we proposed yesterday. They keep voting against the very things they ran on. They've said one thing during the campaign and do another as a government. So delivering a government that's actually on the basis of hope, on results, on the things that Canadians expect is, I think, a great thing for us to go forward with.
I'd be the last person to argue that the government doesn't deserve hard questions of accountability on what they have and haven't delivered on. But respectfully, Mr. Majumdar, my question was about your party, what you did wrong, why you couldn't win the election, not what they're doing wrong. You didn't address it at all.
Well, listen, I think that our party performed extraordinarily. We've achieved a thing in this country that no Conservative leader has in its history. And when you think about the people that we represent, the voices that we animate in Parliament, and the consensus that we have achieved in this country, that despite even with the support of Conservatives for the last year, the Carney Liberals aren't able to move forward the major things that we have proposed and will continue to propose. So the difference between us and them is that they have nice rhetoric but don't deliver any results. We actually have the plan to get the thing done.
The other difference with respect, though, is that they're in government, and Mr. Carney's personal popularity, according to every single public opinion poll I can find, is nearly double that of Mr. Poilievre. What does Mr. Poilievre need to secure in the form of a vote tomorrow in order to remain on as leader? And I know nobody wants to say a number, but does it have to be something in the neighborhood of what Stephen Harper was able to get in a similar situation when he had lost an election but wanted to fight another one back in 2005? That number was closer to 85%.
Isn't it amazing that despite the backing of the press and all the support that Mr. Carney has enjoyed, that while he's been out doing his thing, his numbers as a party have not moved much. Our numbers as a party have remained solid. Canadians are telling us that they want to see results on the issues that we've been campaigning on. And Pierre Poilievre has been touring the entire country, talking to Conservatives coast to coast with massive receptions of support. You're right. I'm not going to get into a number here today, but I will talk about a party that is united, that is focused, that supports its leader with strength. I'm excited to see what numbers we do get over the course of the weekend, and energized with Pierre Poilievre as the next Prime Minister of this country.
Isn't it remarkable, though, with the support levels that your party has retained, that Mr. Poilievre's own support doesn't reflect that?
It's an interesting question. I think that the aggregate of who we are as a Conservative party is what's on the ballot, including the leader. And the leader is one of the strongest litigators we have in the country in both official languages. Pierre Poilievre is a transformational leader for this country. He is one that represents a generational shift that Canadians expect. And it's a very different time this time of year. It's been a year since Mark Carney's been in power. We've had a chance to see what this shiny new character was going to do, and we haven't seen much. So I'm looking forward to an opportunity for round 2, and I'm confident that Pierre Poilievre is going to be great at it.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note, Mr. Majumdar. I appreciate you making the time very much. Thank you.
Good seeing you. Welcome to Calgary.
You as well. Shivaloy Majumdar is a Conservative MP. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but on the other end of that break, our Front Bench, a special edition of our Front Bench, will join me here on set. Back in a moment, live from Calgary.
I've always been clear that me and our United Conservative Caucus are supportive of a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. When you look at the polls, they suggest as many as 30% of Albertans have lost hope. That's about 1 million people. And I'm not going to demonize or marginalize a million of my fellow citizens when they've got legitimate grievances. What we need to do is we need to give Albertans hope.
Expect the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. I'm always clear in my conversation with President Trump to that effect, and then move on to what we can do together.
I described it as an old-fashioned word because we haven't had to use it for a long time. In my opinion, that is treasonous activity, and it needs to be called out. It needs to be stopped.
All right, that is some of the reaction in Ottawa today to some reporting that first came out early this morning from the Financial Times, building on other reporting that part of the separatist movement through the Alberta Prosperity Group had been liaising or meeting in the United States with officials associated with the White House in order to secure funding for their endeavors. That's the kind of reaction it drew in Ottawa. I am here with the Front Bench to talk a little bit more about how that will percolate politically. With us remotely this evening, former BC Premier Christy Clark. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is here. And here with me on set in Calgary at the Conservative Convention, former federal Conservative cabinet minister and MP Monty Silberg. He's the CEO of New West Public Affairs. And next to him, that's of course Stephanie Levitz. She's a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi there.
Nice to see you. Great to have us all together. Monty, I'm going to start with you because you live here in Alberta. You're familiar with the sentiment and the prospect of separation. What did you think of the reaction that it drew today, that reporting drew?
Well, I wasn't surprised. There is concern when reports like this come out, but it is a knee-jerk reaction. And I think a lot of people, upon reflection, will say, let's calm down. They have a right to go ahead and make their arguments. And let's, by all means, defend Alberta staying in Confederation. But let's, when we go after them, let's attack their arguments, not the individuals. I think the Premier's right. They have legitimate concerns. There have been a number of things that have occurred, especially under the Trudeau government, the blocking of pipelines, et cetera, that caused people to really wonder if Alberta had a place in Confederation. I think it's a legitimate concern, and I think we should just wait and let the arguments play out.
The reason I think that this exploded today, Steph, is because on the way into the Premier's meeting this morning, Premier Eby in particular in British Columbia characterized it as treason, which then prompted, reporters to ask other premiers and the Prime Minister exactly what they thought of it. What do you think about how that unfolded?
I mean, it's inflammatory language, right? The word treason, everybody gets their back up. Everyone thinks, okay, is this more than, I don't know, do we need to pay attention? And at a time when it is, I think, clear that national unity is there are chinks in that armor, shall we say? And as much as the Premier's tried to project a united front today, when you have a group going down to meet with the U.S., of all people at all times and all places, it gets people's backup, legitimately. I think that it doesn't discount what the Premier said, even Monty's point, that the people who are contemplating this idea that Alberta should separate have grievances, they want them heard, but to be seeking what looks like or has the objective of looking like an allyship with America at the time when our country is so threatened by America, people are going to freak out. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that on that point in particular, Christy, Premier Smith was pretty emphatic, like, we're sovereign, that's stuff for Alberta and Canada to deal with.
But on other points, there was a real distinguishment between herself and Premier Eby, right? And to Monty's point and to Steph's point, she was saying, hey, some of this, grievance is legitimate and I don't want to dismiss it. Premier Eby, doubled down on the characterization of this as a treasonous activity. And even Premier Ford was like, Danielle Smith, you got to stomp this out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, two things. One, I think that Danielle Smith should stop using the word sovereign. What she means is provincial independence in her realm, constitutional realm, which is an issue for all premiers and has been for a long time, with lots and lots of federal overreach. So provincial independence, lots of people in Western Canada and other parts of the country would support that. Absolutely. But using the word sovereign, I think, is dog whistle politics. She's trying to, send a message to some of the people who are on the extreme, who have been part of her core in the past. And I think it's really irresponsible to do that. I don't think that David Eby should have referred to it as treason. I think that in doing that, and we all believe that there's likely an election coming up in BC, so rhetoric is getting a little bit warmed up. But I think in doing that, because it's clearly not treason under the law, I think what he was doing is giving a whole bunch of attention to a fringe group in Alberta that's never going to get any legs under it, and creating a gift for Donald Trump by raising the profile of this, because what Donald Trump wants out of this is maybe better access to Alberta's resources. Okay. Second, he wants to destabilize the country in the middle of an important negotiation, and we shouldn't be giving him any advantage there.
Actually, on that point, Tom, I want to get your input, and I first want to actually play. I think we should have the clip from Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who this week in one of the many interviews in which he referenced Canada, invoked sort of the possibility of, their interest in separation. Do we have that clip? Can we play it?
Alberta is a wealth of natural resources, but they won't let them build a pipeline to the Pacific. I think we should let them come down into the U.S., and Alberta is a natural partner for the U.S. They have great resources. The Albertans are very independent people. Rumors that they may have a referendum on whether they want to stay in Canada or not.
I mean, Tom, part of the story today is that the reporting today, came after, just a few days after those comments were made. I think that's why part of the other reason why there was the reaction there was.
Yeah, and it's part and parcel of what Trump has been saying since he started musing about the 51st state. No, he won't attack us militarily, but he could attack us economically and here, even politically. It might sound like an odd comparison, but as somebody who lived it, it reminds me of Charles de Gaulle's famous speech from the City Hall of Montreal talking about Vive le Québec libre. Across Canada, in one voice, all Canadians said, mind your own business, except for the people who were cheering in that crowd. So there is a small group of people in Alberta who sincerely believe that they'd be better off leaving Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada in 1998 opened up that door, not just for Quebec on secession, it's for any province that meets their criteria. So we've got to take this stuff seriously, and that's why I think it was such a big mistake for David Eby to use over-the-top language. I agree completely with Christy. She's a lawyer, as is Mr. Eby, as am I. And guess what? It's not treason under the criminal code, but it is a criminal act that he's accusing this group of performing in the United States. Is it political interference and totally inopportune and inappropriate? Yes. But the French were always the object of the same type of entreaty by the separatist movement in Quebec. They were careful with it because they had areas like Corsica and Brittany that could have just as easily tipped, or the Basque region. So they were careful. They always said, well, we're not indifferent, but we're not interfering. And that was their line that they used for decades. I think that the Americans are doing just the opposite. They're having a little bit too much fun sticking their nose into this. Bessent needs a map because he also believes that Alberta is his, quote, gateway to the Arctic. Well, this is typical of what we're going to be dealing with. Bessent is a key player for Trump. He's somebody who is sent forward to give that sort of message. And yes, it's direct interference. It is part and parcel of Trump's threats against Canada. And I agree that it's part of the negotiation tactics of the Americans to destabilize the people across from you. And they still do feel very upset with Carney's speech in Davos. And this is them, reacting after we poked the bear.
One quick final question for you on this, Monty, and about the prospect of a referendum, because it's fair to point out that the Premier, introduced legislation that makes that prospect more likely because the bar to meet is lower. It sounds like from the organizers of the separatist movement, they really feel like they're going to have the numbers to go forward with it. Are you worried that, even if it is a minority of Albertans, that, like Mr. Kenney said earlier on the show, there is a group that feel like this is the place to express their frustration, even if they don't want to separate?
Yes, I think that's completely true. I think there's been polling that indicates maybe about 15% of Albertans feel very strongly about separating versus the 30% that we've seen in polling who indicate that they would vote to go to a referendum and have expressed their concern about federal overreach. And, Tom's talked about that. And I think that's absolutely the case. I think the bigger concern is that if, the referendum goes ahead and the majority says we want to stay in Canada, that these people, the separatist movement, won't stop. And they have other levers to pull, like trying to get a leadership review of the Premier, split the party up, cause this to continue on, and cause all of the the problems that go with it, including driving investment out of Alberta while all of this gets settled.
I do want to switch gears because we're talking here at the Conservative Convention. Tomorrow night, Mr. Poilievre will face a leadership vote. A couple of the delegates spoke to my colleague, Jeremy Charron. I want to play some of those clips for you.
I will be voting to keep him. I do think he's the best person to continue to lead this party.
I'm torn, honestly. I feel like part of me believes that, I like an underdog. I love a good redemption story, but I also want the message to come across very clearly that mistakes were made.
All right, Steph, you've been on the ground here for a little while. What is your sense of the way things are shaping up?
Yeah, bingo to that second quote, right? I think that it's the people here that seem on the fence. It's not a question of Mr. Poilievre, the man. It's a question of how everything is running and how everything is going. And a sense from the delegates that I've spoken to who aren't 100% with Mr. Poilievre, they don't want him to get 100%. They want to be sending a signal that says, hey, not everything is great here. And don't take us for granted. We want to see something different. And I find that really interesting because it's, in its own way, it's not about we don't think he's the right leader. It's just we want him accountable for the mistakes that were made. And I get a sense that people don't see that accountability. But I would also say that the vast majority of people are very proudly wearing the Yes, Pierre buttons that they're picking up the second after they register for this convention.
What, Christy, are you watching for in this vote? And how important, I know there's not a person I can interview here who doesn't tell me the number doesn't matter. How important is the number?
The number's everything. I mean, Joe Clark proved that. You just can't get a remote brand because you can't get away with 50%. It's got to be above 70% in order to people to, to kind of quell any potential dissent there. But, the thing about it is that you look at the Conservative Party base, and Abacus did a really interesting poll a couple of weeks ago. They were out in the field, and they asked, hardcore base Conservatives and prospective Conservatives, so people that are gettable by the Conservative Party but aren't necessarily in the base. The numbers are starkly different. Like you're talking 80% of people think that Pierre Poilievre is doing a great job if they're in the base, and 43% think he's doing a terrible job if they're amongst accessible voters for the Conservatives. So you look at those numbers, same sort of seesaw motion on whether or not he should be whether or not he can win the next election between the people who are in the base and the people who are prospective voters. You can't win elections if you don't get the accessible voters that are there. I mean, they demonstrated that in the last election. They had every chance to win, but they lost those accessible voters, and too many of them went to Carney. So here's the difference between Conservative Party and the Liberal Party ultimately, because so many policy ideas overlap. It's that when Liberals have a leader who can't win, who's getting terrible numbers with prospective voters, Liberals ditch the leader within 10 seconds of the poll getting out. Conservatives have this terrible habit of sticking with their leaders no matter what the polls are telling them. And so, I predict, of course, he's going to come out with a good number. I bet 75 plus, maybe 80%. But, as someone sort of outside the political world now, I kind of look at it and shake my head and think, boy, if you guys don't get a new leader, your odds of winning the next election, based on the polling we're seeing now, are very, very minimal.
Well, it's interesting, Tom, because maybe historically that's been the case, but more recent history has been, in the case of Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, that they did turf them very quickly. And I know, speaking to a lot of people here, they're mindful of that kind of comparison in this instance and feel like, oh, he did get close, so maybe he deserves another shot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I have more sympathy than most about people who go through leadership votes, as you know, Vashi. But I think that Christie has hit the nail right on the head. And that's what I've been hearing the most from Conservatives I've had the chance to speak with over the past couple of weeks. They like Pierre Poilievre. They acknowledge Poilievre's main talking point, that he had a breakthrough, that he got a higher number than the Conservative Party, as it now exists, has ever had before in terms of the overall electorate. But he couldn't win. And that's their key question. Can Pierre Poilievre ever win a Canadian election? And more of the ones that I've been speaking to have been saying that's their ballot question. They don't think he can win. So it's not personal from them about Poilievre. It's personal about the perception of that accessible pool of voters that are necessary to tap into if you want to have an electoral victory. And they think that it is not accessible to the Pierre Poilievre that they've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
The last word on the leadership vote goes to the Conservative on the panel. Monty, what's going to happen?
Well, I think he's going to get well over 80%.
Yeah.
I think he's in good shape. What I'll be watching for is his tone. In his response to the Mark Carney speech, the Davos speech, he really showed a different tone, and it was, in my mind, welcome. It probably was the kind of tone that he would need to adopt to access that 14% of people who didn't put their name beside a Conservative in the last election, but are prepared to do it if they hear something that they like. So, keep it up, Pierre. I think there's a chance that you can continue to build on that really important base that you've established till now, the one that has barely budged. Even the Leger poll that just came out, 38%, I think it was, and it's stayed that strong for the entire year. So I think, he just needs a little change, a little tweaking, and he'll be there.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Really appreciate the discussion this evening. Thanks, everyone, or this afternoon here in Calgary, I should say. Christy Clark, Tom Mulcair, and here on set, Monty Solberg and Stephanie Levitz. We'll take a quick break. Colorado's governor is my next guest after that break.
The car companies, I love the car companies, and you have them, they're all coming back. They're coming back from Mexico, they're coming back from Canada, they're coming back from Japan, and they're coming back from Germany, all over Europe. They're coming back, they're building here because they want to avoid the tariffs.
The latest comments there from U.S. President Donald Trump about his tariff regime, one that has had a measurable impact on certain sectors of the Canadian economy, not the least of which, as he actually pointed out, is the auto sector. We're hearing word that General Motors, for example, could be laying off as many as 1,200 people tomorrow because of that tariff regime. And the union representing the workers there is urging the federal government to keep USMCA intact. Now, how likely is that to happen, and how much willingness is there on the other side of the border for that to remain a distinct possibility? Jared Polis is the governor of Colorado. Hi, Governor. It's good to have you back with us. Thank you so much for making the time for the conversation.
Always a pleasure.
So we've been on the receiving end here in Canada in recent days of kind of ramped up again rhetoric from U.S. President Trump threatening to apply another 100% tariff, for example, on everything going from Canada to the U.S. should we pursue a formalized free trade agreement with China. What do you take from the fact that he's taking aim at us in a very specific way again?
Well, I don't know what else to say besides a little bit of Canadian I studied. We're sorry. This is not the way most Americans feel. It really isn't. Canada is a close friend and ally. Trade wars hurt both of us. They hurt the Canadian people. They hurt the American people. I think it's not only is what he's doing irrational, but frankly, it's unpopular with the American people. It hurts. It increases costs on construction materials and homes and so many things. I believe in a strong hemispheric supply chain working with the USMCA countries, Mexico, Canada, to strengthen against our competition against China and other countries. I think that's where America will come down. Please be patient with us during this difficult period.
What is your sense of the level of pushback right now where you are, but also among governors to Trump's pursuit of this tariff regime now versus, let's say, the last time we spoke, more than 6 months ago, when you were one of the few governors at the time who was speaking out very loudly against it? Do you sense there is more pushback?
There is. I think the governors are beginning to understand more the contributions of the U.S.-Canada relationship. For nearly every state, it's the number one or two trading partner, investment partner. Canadian firms operating in our states, employing thousands of people, firms from our state that have sales in Canada. It works both ways. It benefits everybody. For too long, the U.S.-Canada relationship is something that we took for granted. And I think what we are all waking up to is this is something we need to cherish. This is something we need to actively promote, not just take for granted that our two countries are strong allies.
And do you think at the state level that message will be pushed as this USMCA review kind of unfolds? Because I can tell you here on this side of the border, right, that's what we're all very much focused on. How much of CUSMA will remain intact, let's say, a year from now? What is your position on that? And do you think that message will be made evident to the president during the process?
Yeah, I can't say I've talked to all 50 governors, but I can say I've talked to at least a dozen, including people from the governors of both parties, who are all very strongly supportive of renewing the free trade agreement. Let's go back to what he did last time. We had NAFTA. He renegotiated USMCA. Not substantially different. In some areas, a little stronger. Some areas maybe to the detriment of the U.S. or Canada. But generally speaking, very similar. I hope, is what we all hope, is what the president is looking for here, is some sort of symbolic victory that will, we hope, actually improve the trade agreement between U.S., Canada, and Mexico. This was his trade agreement. He replaced NAFTA with it. He has pride of authorship. It addressed some of his perceived flaws in NAFTA. Let's use that as a starting point to deliver even more value and prosperity for the American, Canadian, and Mexican people.
Do you believe that the deal as it exists right now has benefited the people of Colorado?
Oh, absolutely. As did NAFTA before it, tremendously. I mean, the free trade between the free people encourages mutual prosperity and is a key cornerstone to the economic success of Colorado, America, Canada, Mexico. It's also a vital geopolitical importance with regard to our competitiveness against China and other blocs that represent a potential geopolitical and military threat to the interests of Canada, United States, and Mexico.
You mentioned, Governor, some of the impacts on the ground of the tariffs, and I wondered if you could expand in particular in Colorado about what your assessment of that impact actually is, because it's another one of those things that I think here on this side of the border we had anticipated, let's say a year ago, if Trump follows through on all of this, it's going to be, have a huge impact on American consumers, and that ultimately will push him to change his mind. The impact appears to be, muted compared relative to what the expectation could have been, but is that shifting, do you think, and what has it been like in Colorado?
No, the impact is already real. We did a statewide look at this. We dug deep on the impact. Just as an example, one of the challenges we face in Colorado is high cost of living. It's a beautiful place to live. People want to live here, but the average home in the Denver metropolitan area is about $600,000 US dollars. And new home construction costs increased by as much as 6% because of these tariffs and the utilization of Canadian timber and materials in the construction process. Agriculture, another one, big economic driver for Colorado, impacted by these tariffs. So sector after sector is already feeling it, not to mention, as you said, consumers facing record high prices on items from across the world that are subject to arbitrary tariffs that make no economic sense for the American people or for the people of other countries.
Do you think that in the aggregate and or the Supreme Court will ultimately force the president to change his position?
Well, I hope so. He cares about stock markets potentially. He cares about economic performance. These tariffs are truly a cancer that eats at our economic productivity. The Supreme Court will be deciding at some point. Just to remind folks, that doesn't throw out all the tariffs. There's some it does. I know they've planned on other justifications to bring back other tariffs. That could be a step forward, of course, and I do believe that going forward, Congress does need to make sure that presidents can act in an arbitrary way with regard to tariffs and don't have that unilateral authority, because who's going to trust us in trade agreements in the future if they can be blown up simply at the whim of a particular president?
Speaking of trust, Governor, just one final question for you. Part of what preceded the renewed threats from the U.S. president toward Canada was a speech that our prime minister delivered in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum that garnered a lot of international reaction, in which the thesis was essentially this old world order, rules-based world order, where we kind of trusted the United States to guide us through it, is dead. It's over. And now middle powers have to kind of get together to be able to stand up to greater powers who are at times perhaps abusing them. Abusing that power. I'm paraphrasing, but I wondered what you thought of that thesis, and particularly in the context of somebody who has, for a number of years now, nearly 8, served the constituents that you have.
On a short-term basis, I understand why he said what he said, given where the American position has been. I do think we need to learn to cherish one another more and grow closer. U.S., Canada, Mexico, we have every geopolitical and economic reason to do so. I certainly would agree with the Prime Minister that's not where we are today, but maybe it's a time to envision an even better future, a future that's even better and more prosperous for the major powers of North America.
I'll leave it on that note, Governor. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado. We've got more coverage coming up after a short commercial break, live from Calgary for the Conservative Convention. Back in a moment. As we've been talking about tonight, we are here in Calgary for the Conservative Convention, their annual convention, where there's going to be a really big event tomorrow night, and that is a leadership vote that the leader of the party, Pierre Poilievre, will face. I do want to tell you a little bit about our special coverage. It gets underway. We'll have a power play, of course, at 3 o'clock Mountain, 5 o'clock Eastern, but our special edition of Power Play to cover the leader's speech to delegates here at the party gets underway at 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain. Hope you can join us then. I'm Vashi Capel. Thanks so much for watching Power Play. Have a great rest of your night.